Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
So, any questions on on the project? Any questions on the project? Okay, so I assume there are no questions. Um, Let me get the PowerPoint. Just a second. Okay, you're able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so uh, today we're going to start this new topic called flood routing. Uh, so, before we get into the topic itself, I want to give a kind of a brief background on uh, why we are at this point of flood routing. Okay, so from the very beginning, we've been looking at the. So let me just slide. So from the very beginning, we've been looking at the hydrologic cycle, right? We looked at the different processes in the hydrologic cycle, right? So to begin with, we looked at precipitation, then we looked at ET and so on, and then we looked at what was the next thing we looked at? Precipitation, ET, and then infiltration. I was hoping somebody would answer. Okay. Then we looked at infiltration. What next? After this,
Runoff.
runoff, right? So so we've looked at it from the very beginning. We've looked at it from the perspective of if I have a watershed, right, and it receives rainfall, which is distributed unequally in space and time, how would you estimate the average? How would you estimate missing data, and so on? Okay, so that was the first part, precipitation, right? And then once you know precipitation, then trying to estimate how much you know goes back into the atmosphere in the form of ET. That was the next thing. And then we came to now we are at the land surface, right? So at this up to this point in time, we're looking at water coming down as precipitation and then going back into the atmosphere as ET. Then we start to look at the soil and how it is going to behave, right? So depending on the different types of soil and the different conditions, you may have different levels of infiltration. So we looked at that. And then once you know infiltration, right? So then you're saying, okay, so if this is the infiltration capacity of the soil, and if I have a rainfall which has a higher rate than the infiltration capacity of the soil, then you would start generating runoff and so on. Then when we came to runoff, we said, okay, so is there a way for us to estimate what the runoff is from a watershed, given the different kinds of soil and land use and antecedent moisture conditions and rainfall rates and so on. So we were able to find out what the runoff would be for a given area. Now, when the runoff is generated, then we came up with this idea of a hydrograph, which allows us to. The hydrograph is essentially an extension of this runoff idea, right? So instead of looking at every single rainfall event as an independent entity, I say that I will come up with a standard response, a unit response of my watershed given a certain kind of rainfall event in terms of runoff. When I say response, I mean runoff. Runoff is the response of the watershed to input in the form of precipitation, right? So I try to standardize it and come up with an approach that will allow me to estimate what the unit response of the watershed would be to a given rainfall event. And then if I know the unit response, then I'm able to estimate what the response will be for any other event. Okay, so that was the idea of the hydrograph. So up to this point, we've kind of been looking at the hydrologic cycle as it, um, as it impacts the watershed in the different stages, right? So now, when I generate runoff from the watershed and the water flows into the stream in the form of runoff, eventually it will reach some kind of a reservoir. Okay, so let us imagine. Okay, so let us say I have a reservoir like this. Okay, just imagine a reservoir. I'm just showing a cross-sectional view, but naturally it will also have a plan. Okay, so let us say the reservoir at some time t has some water level h. Okay, this is actually a function of time, right? So you can understand that. Now this reservoir, the, the one of the functions of the reservoir is to store water, right? Store water for whatever purpose it may be. It may be for irrigation, it may be for power generation, it may be for domestic water supply, for industrial use, whatever, right? So irrespective of the use, the intended use of the water, the primary purpose of the reservoir is to store water, right? So now this reservoir, imagine, imagine I have a watershed that looks something like this. I have a stream running down the middle, okay, and then at the outlet, suppose I build a reservoir, okay, at the outlet I build a reservoir. All right. Now this reservoir has a certain ability to hold water, right? Which depends on what its current water level is and the rate at which water is coming into the reservoir, right? Right. So the reservoir has a certain capacity to hold water. It depends on two factors. One is the rate at which water is coming in, and the other is what is the current water level in the reservoir. Okay. Then every reservoir will also have an outlet. Okay. So I've drawn it like this, but let us imagine I have a reservoir which has a, let us say, some kind of a structure which regulates the outflow. So let us say I have water level over here in the reservoir. Now this is a longitudinal cross section along the direction of flow. Okay, so water is coming in. So I have inflow coming in over here, and I have this structure which is preventing the water from flowing further down the stream. I'm stopping it so that I can store some water. Right. Once water level goes below, above a certain height, then it becomes necessary to start to release the water because the stability of the structure depends on the water level being at a certain height. So if you're expecting, right, if you're expecting that I'm going to be receiving a lot of inflow coming into this reservoir, what is typically done is that either you allow it to, just flow over the reservoir and just become a part of the uh, stream further downstream, right? So you allow it to flow out, right? So this any reservoir has got three major characteristics. One is its storage capacity. The other is the inflow that it is receiving. And the third one, which is the final aspect of it, is the outflow that the reservoir lets go of, right? So now the question is, not only is storage one of the functions of the reservoir, another function of the reservoir is also flood prevention, right? So you may, if you look back about a month back, those of you who are in Andhra Pradesh, you would have encountered these, you would have heard news about, okay, so there has been incessant rainfall. There's been a lot of rainfall in the catchment areas. So this, Prakasham barrage is being opened up, whatever it is, right? So you know where Prakasham barrage is, right? It's in, where is it? Vijayawada, right? So Prakasham barrage is being opened up, or whatever, some Sri Sailam dam has been opened up, and so on, right? So depending on which part of Andhra you are in, you would have heard some of these things in the last 3-4 weeks, right? So the point is this, that the regulation of the outflow of the water from the reservoir is something that is planned. It is not an arbitrary thing, okay? Because we are controlling the water level in the reservoir by opening a gate to allow water to flow out, right? Or closing it to allow the water to fill up, and so on, right? So you don't want to open the gate when the water level is very low, right? So if the water level is over here, if you open the gates and let some water out, you are actually not making use of the reservoir in an optimal way. So what is typically done is, once the reservoir level reaches a certain height, and then you're anticipating that further inflow is going to be coming in, then you open the gate appropriately. You may, some of these reservoirs have multiple gates, so you may decide to open one gate, you may decide to open 5 gates, and so on, right? So that you can allow more and more water to pass out of the reservoir, because you are anticipating more flow is coming in. Okay, so the objective of the chapter that we are going to be looking at now, flood routing, is basically to control the flood that is incoming and allow it to pass through the reservoir in a controlled manner. Okay, so when I say a flood is coming in, what are the two aspects of the flood? There are two aspects to a flood which are critical. Okay, one is the peak discharge of the flood. Okay, the other is, so when we develop the unit hydrograph, or the flood hydrograph, there are two things that matter. One is the peak, and the other is the
Time.
time, right? So suppose I have, in any hydrograph that we've always looked at so far, we typically define that hydrograph. Let's say if you think of a triangular hydrograph, you say the time to peak is so and so, and the peak is so and so, right? These two parameters are very important, right? You have the peak discharge and the time at which that peak happens. What do you want to do? What is the purpose of the reservoir? The purpose of the reservoir is to lower the peak. Correct? If the peak that is coming in is, let us say, 100, the reservoir should be able to store some of it and lower the peak further downstream. So instead of 100 flowing downstream, maybe the reservoir is able to bring it down to 70 or 60 or 50, depending on the capacity of the reservoir, right? Depending on the, why do you want to do that? Why do we want to bring that 100 down to 70 or 60 or whatever it may be? What purpose is served by bringing down the peak of the flood?
Uh, It can prevent the washing away of the nearby areas.
Flooding, basically, right? So if the flood comes in and you're not able to control it, it will just wash away everything that's downstream, right? One of the objectives of building a reservoir is that it will able you to control the flood, right? So flood control is one of the important aspects of a reservoir, right? So you're able to bring down the peak, right? So instead of 100 cubic meters per second, for example, flowing into the river, which may cause a certain amount of flooding, which may cause erosion and so on, if you bring it down to 70, for example, then to that extent you have reduced flooding downstream, right? And to that extent you've been able to manage the flood. And the other is that second aspect, time, right? So if the incoming flood, the peak is 100 and it happens in 1 hour, okay, suppose I'm able to bring it down by 70, right? From 100 I bring it down to 70, and instead of the peak happening in 1 hour, i I delay the peak and I make it 2 hours, let us say. Okay, what is the advantage of that? See, I'm just saying 1 hour. What doesn't mean doesn't mean in a real situation it will be 1 hour or 2 hours. I'm just giving an example. Okay, so if you are able to delay the peak, what is the advantage of delaying the peak? Why should you want to delay the peak?
Intensity may be reduced.
So you've already the peak is the intensity, right? So 70 cubic meters per second is the intensity of the flow or the discharge rate, right? So the flow rate is already an intensity. Just think about it a little bit. Suppose I tell you the flood is going to come. It's coming in the next 5 minutes. Okay, what will you do? Suppose I tell you it's coming, but it's coming in next 4 hours. There's a difference in your response, right? If I say 5 minutes, you will just take your, what will you take first? I hope you will take something valuable. Maybe most of you guys will pick up your mobile and if I say it's coming in 4 hours, you may pick up some of your documents, or your laptop, whatever it is, and then you run, right? So your response is different if I tell you it's coming in 5 minutes or if I tell you it's coming in 4 hours, right? So that's the point. So if the flood is going to come, but if I give you enough warning, okay, then you can, to the extent possible, you will be able to save more property, for example. Okay, I'm just giving a course example. It's not a very, I'm not giving a very scientific, I'm not describing it in very scientific terms. I'm saying it more as a practical issue, right? So depending on the warning that is available to you, your response will be different, right? That's all it is. That is the objective of a reservoir, is to one, reduce the peak, and two, to increase the time at which that peak happens. If these two things can be accomplished by a reservoir, then you would say that I have been able to successfully manage the flood, right? If I measure my success in terms of these two metrics, number one, reduce the peak, number two, increase the time, that means I have able to successfully manage the flood. Okay, so that is what I mean by this term, flood routing. Now you all of you have heard about, you all heard this word router, right? R-O-U-T-E-R, router. Everybody probably has a Wi-Fi router or whatever, right? What is the role of that Wi-Fi router? Is to, it basically receives data and transmits data, right? It transmits some wireless signal to you, using which you are able to access the internet, and then you send an email, it goes to the router and then goes off, whatever it is. Okay, we'll not get into that. The objective is the same here. In this case, I'm looking at the reservoir as a router which is managing this incoming flow and outgoing flow. Incoming flow comes in, my reservoir store some of it and lets some of it go, right? So basically it is doing a routing job. Okay, so that's the idea of flood routing. All right, so I just wanted to kind of uh, give that kind of a background before we get into it, because otherwise it's a little abstract. Okay, so let's get into it. Yeah, so basically the objective is, if you are able to estimate the magnitude and time of flood at a point, right? So if you are able to estimate both the magnitude means the peak, and the time at which that flood happens, right? That is one of the objectives of flood routing, right? Given an inflow hydrograph upstream, right? I know that an inflow hydrograph upstream at an upstream point is known. Then I want to find out at this downstream point at some location that I am standing at, I want to find out what the magnitude of the flood is and at what time the flood will arrive at this point. Because if you think about it, the flood, when it arrives like a wave, right? So if you look at the unit hydrograph, for example, or a flood hydrograph, it'll look like this, something like a wave, right? So the flood just keeps moving further and further downstream. At some point, I'm able to stop that peak from being that high, bring down the peak, and I also try to uh, increase the time of the. So if on the x-axis I have time, and on this y-axis I have flow. So if this is my inflow, suppose I'm able to do this. Just imagine this. Okay, suppose this is my outflow. You will notice, I tried to draw it in such a way that the peak is lower than the inflow and the time to peak is greater than the inflow. So that is what I'm trying to achieve when I do this flood routing. Okay. Okay. So now it can be done. This aspect, this idea of flood routing can be done for a reservoir or even for a channel, right? Even if I just have a simple channel, I can do the same thing of routing this flood through this hydrologic system. So you can think of the reservoir or the channel reach as a hydrologic system, okay, which essentially does this job of reducing the peak and increasing the time. Reducing the peak, I mean the magnitude of the flood, and increasing the time at which this peak happens. Okay. So when I do it for a reservoir, okay, when I do it for a reservoir, we use this technique called level pool routing. Okay, we'll be discussing about level pool routing a little bit later. And then the other one is if I do it for a channel or a river, okay, there the methodology that we use, there are so many methods, okay, but we are only going to be learning about these two methods. One for a reservoir, which is level pool routing, and the other for a channel or a river, which is the Muskingum method. Okay, these two methods we are going to be discussing in this course, right? We'll not get into other methods. There are many other methods available. So we will only be looking at level pool routing, which is applicable for a reservoir, which means when I say reservoir, I'm implying that it is a structure that allows you to store water for a considerable period of time. Whereas a river can also store water, right? If you think about a river, if the water level in the river changes, right? So let us say I have a river cross section that looks like this. Okay, so if the water level is over here, okay, and then an incoming hydrograph comes in, right? Incoming flood comes in. If the water level in the river changes to somewhere over here, whatever this portion, the increased portion is, that is also some kind of storage. Okay, but it's not storage in the sense of it happening, for a considerable period of time, right? Compared to a reservoir, the time for which this water level will rise in the river is much smaller. Okay, a reservoir can store, you can store an entire monsoon's rainfall in a reservoir, depending on the size of the reservoir and depending on how strong your monsoon is and so on, right? But a river, typically, you will notice this, right? If you look at your river right after a rainfall event, you will see the water level in the river is high. Okay, and then the rainfall stops, and then you go back 2 days later, the water level again has dropped back in the river, right? So, but the reservoir is not like that. The reservoir typically is intended to store water for a long period of time, right? It may be able to supply water for 5 months or 6 months or whatever it may be until the next monsoon arrives. All right. So that's the difference between the reservoir and the channel. The channel also has a capacity to store water, but the time that we are talking about over which this storage happens is much shorter for a channel or a river. And I say channel, I mean a river. Okay, channel, river, both same thing, right? So that's the only difference, right? Both of them have a capacity to store. The capacity for the reservoir to store is for a much longer time duration as compared to a channel or a river. All right. Okay. So now let's get into level pool routing. Okay. So I'll try to use, uh, mostly I'll try to just draw on this. I don't want to. So now let's imagine I have on this side, I'm going to draw a oops, and flow on the, okay, let's say flow rate. Okay. So let us say I have, so I already know what I mean by, okay, so let us say this is my inflow. This is my outflow. Okay. So now, so we are considering, so when I say level pool routing, okay, so what do these terms indicate? What do you think I mean by level pool routing? We've already discussed what it is, right? What do you think is intended by using the phrase level pool? Anybody? Oops, 1 second. I lost my screen. you able to see my screen now?
No, sir.
No? Okay, one second. Now? You're able to see. Okay, good. So now, so the thing is this, we are, what do you think is implied by level pool?
Draining if level is increased.
What is that?
Means, if level of height if level of water is increased in the storage, we will drain it out, something like, I guessed.
Okay, so essentially the thing is this, I have a reservoir. Okay, so let us say I have a reservoir. I assume that the water level in the reservoir always remains level, no matter what the incoming inflow is, no matter what the outgoing outflow is, right? At any given point of time, there will be some water coming in and some water going out. If the reservoir is so large, right, the reservoir is so large that this incoming flow of water and the outgoing flow of water, whatever the rates may be, is so insignificant or so small, I won't say insignificant, so small that the water level in the reservoir is almost always just remaining level. Okay, that's what I mean by level pool routing. Okay, it's a very throughout this incoming flood and outgoing flood, okay, the water level in the reservoir remains level. Doesn't mean it remains the same. It remains level. Okay, so it changes slowly as a function of time, but it's not like one portion of the reservoir it's declining and the other portion of the reservoir it's increasing. In reality, it may happen, right? At the outlet, if you get close to the outlet, the water level starts to dip a little bit, right? You have what is called drawdown and so on. Anyway, but we'll just ignore that. We'll assume that the water level in the entire reservoir remains level throughout the duration of the flood. Okay, so that's what I mean by level pool routing. So now, so this is my reservoir. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to write inflow like this, inflow and outflow like this. Okay, naturally it doesn't happen like this, but I'm just simplifying it. And then I have storage. Okay, so now these are the three processes that I'm interested in trying to estimate. The inflow is known, right? So whatever we have studied up to this point, we've studied precipitation, infiltration, runoff, unit hydrograph, all of that. Suppose you use all that information and you say that in this watershed, this will be the inflow this will be the flood hydrograph resulting from some rainfall event over 1 day or 2 days, whatever it may be. Okay, you use everything that you've learned up to this point and produce the flood hydrograph for a watershed. That flood hydrograph that you produced is the input to my reservoir, right? Whatever you have learned up to this point, you use all that information and come up with a flood hydrograph, which is simply the inflow into my reservoir. So that inflow that I've drawn over here, this is simply the result of applying everything that you have learned so far to develop a flood hydrograph, right? Now the question is, at this reservoir, which is encountering this incoming flood hydrograph, what will be the response of the reservoir in terms of its change in storage, in terms of the outflow that's happening, and so on. Okay, so can I not write an equation that maybe looks like this? For this reservoir, can I write this equation ds by dt equal to, what will it be equal to?
0.
Huh?
Inflow minus outflow.
Inflow minus outflow. Inflow minus outflow. Maybe I'll write q instead of o, because it can get a little bit confusing. Okay, I'll write q for outflow and I for inflow. So ds by dt equal to I of t minus q of t, right? So then, can I write this as ds I of t dt minus q of t dt? I can do this, right? Correct? Okay. So now, if I'm interested in looking at Now, what is the objective here? We are interested in trying to find out what the outflow hydrograph, right? Given the inflow hydrograph, I want to find out what the outflow hydrograph will be for this given reservoir, right? When I say given reservoir, that means I know what is the capacity of this reservoir to store water. Every reservoir has some capacity to store water, right? So if you go to whichever dam in the country, they'll say this is the the maximum flood level, like maximum level MFL in the reservoir will be mentioned to you. Okay, so you will have the maximum flood level. So then you know that this is the capacity of the reservoir to store water. So that is known. Okay, the inflow hydrograph is known, right? Because we've done all of this, whatever we've done up to this point in the semester is to try to find out what the inflow hydrograph is. So you find out what the inflow hydrograph is. You know what the storage capacity of your reservoir is. The objective is to try to find out what the outflow hydrograph from this reservoir will be, right? Fairly straightforward. So now when I say outflow hydrograph, what do I mean? Let us imagine at time t equal to 0, the outflow from the hydrograph was 0. Okay. At this point, the inflow hydrograph starts to come in. Okay. When time t equal to 0, my outflow hydrograph, let us say it's 0. At this point, time t equal to 0, the inflow hydrograph starts to come into the reservoir. Okay. So as soon as inflow starts to come in, you will expect that something may happen to the outflow hydrograph, right? Depending on the time that you are at, right? Depending on how long it has been since you started receiving the inflow hydrograph, you will start to expect some flow to start happening in the outflow hydrograph. Okay, so let us just take any two time steps, t and t plus delta t. Okay, if I'm able to write this equation that I've written over here, if I'm able to write this for, let us say, storage at time step j and storage at time step j plus 1. Okay, so I'm going to write this equation that you see over here. I'm going to write this equation for two time steps j and j plus 1. Okay, so then this will be I of j to I of j plus 1, q of j, q of j plus 1, right? Now, if you take j equal to 0, you can solve for the first time step. So I'm writing this equation as a general one, but naturally, if at some time t equal to 0, you know the qj, right? So you can always solve for qj plus 1 and then iterate, then that becomes your qj, and then you solve for the next time step qj plus 1 and so on, right? So you can take an approach starting from time t equal to 0, you can solve this equation because you know everything in this equation apart from qj plus 1, right? At time t equal to 0, you know the storage, you know the incoming flow, you know the outflow. At time j plus 1, you know ij plus 1 because you know the inflow hydrograph already. Okay, you can estimate what sj plus 1 will be, and you can estimate what qj plus 1 will be. In fact, there are two unknowns in this equation, right? One is sj plus 1 and the other is qj plus 1, right? Is this okay? Any questions? You're understanding what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So now let us try to understand what kind of information we need to solve this equation. I've already told you what is known. Okay, let me write on the next slide. I of t is known, which means what? Ij is known, ij plus 1 is also known. Okay, qj is known. Okay, maybe I should not say qj, I should say q at time t equal to 0 is known. storage at time t equal to 0 is known. Right? These are uh, the known terms in that equation. So is there a way for us to try to estimate what qj plus 1 and sj plus 1 will be given this information? Okay. Do we need anything else to attempt to solve this problem? Okay. Maybe I'll try to give you some more information. So let us say, I'll probably give you a hint. Suppose I know the response of right. So for a given reservoir, I know what the relationship between storage and the water elevation, the water surface elevation in the reservoirs, right? I will know that I know the relationship between storage and H, yes or no. For a given reservoir, I know that if the water level is at such and such a height, then this is the volume of water that is being stored, right? If the water level increases, then the storage also increases, right? So you may have some kind of relationship that looks like this, let us say. Okay, storage versus H is known. Okay, so S versus H is known. So these are all the known known factors in the before you attempt to solve the problem. You need to know some aspects of the system that you're looking at, right? So if I know the reservoir, then that means I know what the relationship between H and storage is, right? So now, is there something similar like this that we can say about Q? Is there something that we know? Suppose I put Q on the y-axis. Do we know something that we can correlate Q with? Any other parameter that we can correlate Q with that we already know? Okay.
Sir, but Q depends on the situation also, how much amount of water we want to make it flow out of the
Correct.
reservoir.
You're right. But my question is this. Now, let's see. In the last semester, you learned about what is that? Flow in open channels, right? There you had this idea of, you know, a weir. Remember this, a weir, which obstructs flow in an open channel and which allows you to estimate what does it allow you to estimate? What does the weir do? What is the objective? What is the role of a weir? What is the purpose behind having a weir? One purpose is to store some water. The other is
Flow rate.
to estimate the flow rate, right? So if you remember, we developed relationship between Q and some other parameter in the channel, which allows you to estimate the flow rate. What was that parameter? Nobody? Okay. So again, you have a relationship between Q and H, right? So maybe I'll give you an example that might make it a little bit clearer to you. So let us say I have a sharp crested weir. Suppose I have a sharp crested weir of this kind, okay, and then the flow happens like this and goes over it, something like this, right? If I know this height h, we derived some expression that q is proportional to h to the power 3 by 2. Okay, if you go back into your notes from the previous semester, if you still have them, you may be able to find we developed some relationship of this kind. So I think this h power 3 by 2, h power 5 by 2, for the different kinds of weirs, we developed this kind of a relationship. So we do know that depending on the height in the height of water, the flow rate will change. Okay, so I will leave that portion for you to just go and look up from your previous semester's notes. Okay, so q and h are related. Okay, but h is not known. I'm not saying we know h. Okay, I'm just saying there's a relationship between q and h. So again, it may look something like that. As h increases, q also increases. Okay, so let's keep these two pieces of information in mind and let's continue. Okay, so now let's go back to that equation that we developed, right? So here we are. Integral ds equal to integral ds from sj to sj plus 1 equal to integral I of t dt from, okay, can't write this. You have to write ij dt to ij plus 1 dt, right? Otherwise it's okay. So now given this equation, can we simplify this equation a little bit to make it a little bit easier for us to tackle this equation? The left hand side is very easy, right? Maybe I'll just erase something over here so I have some space to write. Okay, let us look at the left hand side. What happens to the left hand side? Left hand side is simple, sj plus 1 minus sj, right? So this left hand side, I'll write it over here. Okay, sj plus 1 minus sj equal to integral I of t dt from ij dt to ij plus 1 dt. Correct? Can we simplify this? Let us say that these are the two time steps ij and ij plus 1. Right? So this is ij and this is ij plus 1. Okay. Looking at this plot, can you tell me what this integral I of t dt from ij dt to ij plus 1 dt will be?
Volume of inflow.
Correct, but you're right. Volume of inflow in that time step. So just look at the geometrically, can we say what that would be?
ij plus 1 upon 2 into dt.
Everybody agrees? What is this integral? This integral is simply the area under this curve between these two lines. So it's basically this portion, right? At time step j, the incoming flow rate is ij, and at time step j plus 1, it is j plus 1. Assuming that between these 2 points it is more or less linear, it's just simply a trapezoid, right? So the area under those or between those 2 lines is simply ij plus 1 divided by 2 into delta t. Okay, I'll use delta t instead of dt. Okay, it's a little bit easier now. Similarly for q, you can write it for q also, right? So it will become minus qj plus 1 divided by 2 times delta t. Okay, is this fine? Is this okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now let us look at the terms that we know at time step j and j plus 1. In this equation, which terms do we know and which terms do we not know? Let's go from the first term onwards. Sj plus 1, do we know that? What will be the storage at the end of, let us say, take the extreme case where j equal to 0, which means time t equal to 0. Do you know the storage in the reservoir at time t equal to 0? You know it,
Yes.
right? You know the water level in the reservoir before the flood comes in. If you know the water level, then you know the storage, because like I said over here, if you know the water level, you know the storage, right? This curve gives you H versus storage, or storage versus H, sorry, right? You know the water level, so you know the storage, right? So Sj is known. Sj plus 1, is it known? It's not known, right? So Sj plus 1 is not known. Sj is known. Ij and Ij plus 1, both of them are known, right? Because it's the incoming hydrograph. Both of them are known. Qj, is it known? Is
Yes.
Qj known? Yeah, it's known, right? Because of course we can always go back to time step t equal to 0. If you know it at time t equal to 0, you can find out that at time t equal to first time step, and so on. If you proceed, you always know Qj, you don't know Qj plus 1, right? So Qj plus 1 is unknown. So now what I'm going to do is, from this equation, I'm going to simplify it such that I'm going to collect all the unknowns on one side and collect all the knowns on the other side. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. Okay, I would have preferred to do it on the same slide, but I've kind of messed up by, okay. Yeah, I just do it on the same slide. Otherwise, it's all right. So let me collect the terms. So I'll have, if I want to take all the Sj plus 1 terms to the other side, we'll have 2 times Sj plus 1 divided by delta t plus Qj plus 1. Just please make sure you're making, I'm not making any mistake with the algebra. Okay, 2 times Sj plus 1 divided by delta t plus Qj plus 1. Okay, that's right. Equal to Ij plus Ij plus 1. Okay, plus 2Sj by delta t minus Qj. Is this right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think I got it right. Okay, so now what have I done? I have simply taken all the unknowns to one side and taken all the knowns to the other side. Okay, now the question is, using these two plots that I have obtained, right? Or sorry, not obtained, which I know already. Given the relationship between storage and H and Q and H, can I derive an equation, or sorry, a curve that relates, combining these two curves? I want to generate a curve between Q and 2S by delta T plus Q. Can I do this? Do you think it's possible to develop this kind of a curve, combining these two curves? Delta T is independent of anything, right? So I just take any given value of delta T and I try to combine these two curves and develop some curve that looks like this, let us say, okay, which basically relates 2s by delta t plus q and q, right? So if I take any given point, okay, for any given value of h, okay, so let us say I have for some value of h, if I know the storage for that same value of h, I know q, right? For a given value of h, if I know both s and q, can I not develop this curve between q and 2s by delta t plus q? For all values of h, the corresponding values of s and the corresponding values of q are known, right? So using that, I develop this curve of 2s by delta t plus q versus q, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So now the objective is this. So then you go back to this equation that I developed. So it's important why I put this on the I collected all these terms on the left hand side, and then I have all the known terms on the right hand side. So now, if all the known terms are here on the right hand side, I will compute what this number is, right? 2s by delta t plus q will be known at time step j plus 1, because I know all the values on the right hand side. I know ij, I know ij plus 1, I know sj, I know qj. Can I not solve for this entire right hand side? I can, for a given delta t, whatever that is given to you. Okay, so then I know the entire left hand side. I know. I just don't know how much is sj plus 1 and how much is the contribution of qj plus 1 in that left hand side. Correct? So for that, what do? I come to this curve, and for that known value of 2s by delta t plus q, I simply come to this curve and find out what the corresponding value of qj plus 1 is. This will give me qj plus 1. Is that okay? Right? Is this clear? Is this clear what I have done? Okay, let me again write the equation over here, and then we'll go through it slowly. 2sj plus 1 divided by delta t plus qj plus 1. These are the unknowns. It's all on the left hand side, equal to ij plus 1 plus 2sj divided by delta t minus qj. Right? Everything is known on over time. Okay, everything is known on the on the right hand side. So I simply put in all the numbers and find out this left hand side number. I'll get some number for this. I come back to this plot which I have already developed before solving the problem. Okay, which tells me the relationship between 2s by delta t plus q and q. So on this curve, for this given value of 2s by delta t plus q at time step j plus 1, I'll simply solve for qj plus 1. Okay, so solve for qj plus 1. Once I know qj plus 1, then again you solve for sj plus 1, right? Then go to the next time step. You know qj and sj, which is j plus 1 here. When you go to the next time step, this becomes qj and sj. You solve for the next time step, and so on. All right. So what we'll do is, in tomorrow's class, tomorrow, if you remember, we are going to have two classes. We're going to have one in the morning and one in the afternoon as well. Okay, to make up for the class that we lost last week. All right. So tomorrow we'll solve a problem on this. Okay, and then we'll move on to the next topic. All right. So if you have any questions, bring it up tomorrow, or you can email me today, whatever. Okay, on this level pool routing, and then of course, please remember on Thursday you'll be presenting your project. All right. Thank you very much, and see you guys at 11 o'clock tomorrow. Okay, take care.